Morning, members, and welcome to Hampshire Fire and Rescue Authority's 2019 Annual General Meeting. I'm Paul Hodgson, here on behalf of the Clerk to the Authority, John Coughlin. Before we begin, I should remind everyone that the meeting is open to the public and is being webcast, and that members of the public have got the right to record and report on the meeting, so anyone who remains will be deemed to have consented to the broadcast of their image and anything they say. So without further ado, we'll move on to item 1, which is election of chairman for the coming year. So I'll ask for nominations for chairman for the year.
I'd quite like to nominate Councillor Carter, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to second that.
So are all members agreed on Councillor Carter being appointed? So Councillor Carter, you are appointed as chairman.
Right. Well, thank you everybody for re-electing me. I will do my level best to represent you appropriately during this coming year. Just a couple of other announcements. I understand there's a fire alarm test scheduled for 11:30 today, which will last no longer than 1 minute. We will remain here in the meeting during this time unless advised otherwise. The microphones are before you on the table to amplify your voice. We've had issues in the past, so I'm pulling mine in towards me, so hopefully you can all hear me. And I don't need to remind you, I'm sure, but you push the button in order to speak. Those of you with mobile phones, please make sure they're disabled. Right, well, welcome again to this annual general meeting with the Fire Authority. Welcome to Councillor Tig Outlaw from the Isle of Wight, the member for Lake North. Good to see you here, Tig. Moving to your agenda, item 2 is the election of vice chairman. I will propose Councillor Ros Chad be re-elected as Vice Chairman.
I second that, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other nominations? No? Thank you. Right. You're duly re-elected. Thank you. So, moving on with the agenda, apologies for absence. Well, we have Councillor Redian Vaughan, who is, I'm not sure whether he's on a ship at Normandy, but he's certainly over there, dealing with situation over there and with some of the veterans and their families. And we also have Councillor Jason Fazakerley, the Portsmouth councillor, who I'm not sure if he's meeting President Trump, but he's he's on the seafront at Southsea with Portsmouth City, and I'm sure he'll have a fine time there this morning. They've got another hour before they start. So, item 4, declarations of interest. Well, you're all familiar with that, members, but if anything comes up during the meeting that you think is an interest, please let us know. Item 5, please turn to page 5 for minutes of the previous meeting. Now, I do have an item, an issue with this item. Right on the top line, it says there, meeting of, well, initially it says meeting of Hampshire County Council, which it isn't. It's a meeting of the authority, but the meeting was not at Winchester. It was here. So, Katie, can we get that corrected, please? Because
Sorry, Chairman.
that is not correct.
No, thank you, Chairman. Can I just say, sorry, I was just going to apologise for that, and also with the, I mentioned to Councillor Mintoff about the list of the apologies from the last meeting. It's to do with a glitch in the template, so we're going into that and sorting that out, so it won't happen again.
Right. Okay. Just going through the pages there for accuracy, and then we'll take matters arising. So page 5, 6, 7, and 8. So anybody got anything they wish to raise from the minutes, please?
Thank you,
Councillor
Mr. Chairman. Yes, on page 6, there was an incorrect statement made by a member of Parliament in the House of Commons, and she was invited down to HFRS. Has she accepted, and is she coming, or has she been?
Thank you.
Shall I answer that, Chairman? Thank you, Chairman. So she wrote back and explained her reference has been drawn from the HMI's report. She's not accepted the invite at this stage.
Right. Okay. Well, are we going to invite her again, or what is the? Do we have any plan?
I had no great plans inviting her again, Chairman, but again, I'll take the authority's lead on that.
Well, we're waiting. Well, there's a lot happening, obviously, in Parliament. We're waiting for the Fire Minister to come, are we not? So I think we'd prefer to see him first, but maybe that's something for the future. Right. Any other comments from the minutes? Everybody happy? Thank you. So I'll sign those minutes. And you're going to arrange those amendments, Katie? Yes. Thank you. So, moving on to item 6, deputations. I do not have any. Item 7, Chairman's announcements. Right, so first of all, most important thing of the day, I think. Andy Bowers, sitting over there. This is Andy's last meeting. Deputy Chief Fire Officer Andy Bowers, who has served with Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service for more than 30 years, is retiring, becoming a true leader, and is widely considered as a firefighter's firefighter. During this time, he has dealt with large incidents, devised new strategies, and been keen in driving up national standards in command and decision-making. On behalf of the authority, Andy, and the people of Hampshire, I would like to take this opportunity to offer you our heartfelt thanks for your service over all this time. Thank you very much, Andy, on behalf of the authority. I will have a lot more to say at the end of the meeting. So, also, welcome to the service. We're delighted to welcome Steve Apter, who has started in his role as Deputy Chief Fire Officer. It is a huge testament to the reputation of our service that it attracts a candidate of such high calibre, whose credentials and experience will be an asset to his colleagues and to the people of Hampshire. I'm very much looking forward to working with Steve and supporting him in continuing the excellent work that has been achieved in making Hampshire safer. So welcome, Steve. We're delighted that you've joined us. So also, the Combined Fire Authority progress. You'll recall, members, that at our meeting in January, we agreed to proceed with our proposal to establish a new combined authority to cover the wider council area of Hampshire, the Isle of Wight, Portsmouth and Southampton. We delegated responsibility to our Chief Officer in consultation with the Chief Finance Officer, Clerk and myself and the island to submit a formal application to the Home Secretary to create a new combined fire authority. I'm pleased to confirm that submission was lodged with the Office of the Home Secretary on the 30th of May. This is a significant step and the result of a number of years of increasingly close ties and collaboration between the Isle of Wight Council and ourselves. The future progress of the initiative is now a matter for the Home Secretary. I would like to register our thanks to the councils of Hampshire, the Isle of Wight, Portsmouth and Southampton for their support, which is a significant factor in being able to reach this point with consensus and support from all parties. The Chief Officer will keep us appraised of developments as this matter proceeds. So, and finally, under my announcements, I should perhaps at every meeting have a general announcement acknowledging the tremendous work by our firefighters, which, you know, there's fires every day and they deal with these things in their very professional way. But there has been a recent Southampton fire which occurred at Canberra Towers, which again was dealt with exceptionally well by our firefighters, but I thought it relevant to just mention it and to acknowledge Southampton City Council, because this fire was contained within the flat because of the installation of sprinklers. And I think that is really significant. It has been acknowledged in the local Southampton press, but I'd like to think, and the Chief Officer may wish to comment, that we may be able to expand upon the significance of the impact of sprinklers in Canberra Towers.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, and authority members, as well as Southampton City Council, I'm delighted to congratulate you on your policy positions. I think the fact that politicians, members of authorities have led this high standard in making sure that sprinklers are pushed forward where we can, where they make sense, is one, a credit to Hampshire Fire Authority, but also to our area, because there is no doubt that that fire in Canberra Towers was controlled and managed by that sprinkler system, as well as our own good staff. But we know that that fire would have spread through the rest of that particular flat had it not been for the sprinkler system that had been retrofitted. So it is now being used as a national story, in as much as the fire sector is being used as further evidence to support the English move for changing to legislation to retrofit in those buildings. So we continue to press that, and here's an excellent example. It's a shame, of course, that the fire broke out at all, and there was damage caused, but the fact they sprinkler held it in check and kept our firefighters and the residents safe is testament to that policy which you agreed some time ago. So again, thank you to the authority, thank you to Southampton, and thank you to my firefighters for the work they've done.
Do you want to add anything, Sharon, as a Southampton member?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I received a phone call Saturday morning from one of our officers to say that the fire had happened in Canberra Towers, but that the fire was contained within the kitchen. So it wasn't just the flat, it was the actual room where the fire was. So naturally, I was very pleased to hear that, and we are retrofitting sprinklers in all the Southampton City Council tower blocks. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Right. So, Roger, yes?
Chairman, picking up on the point about the sprinklers, is there any case of us trying to get sort of one of the television networks involved locally to try and do a programme or as a news item, not so much about the fire and the flat, but what the benefits of sprinklers are, so that we can push the message over in a stronger way? I mean, national publicity is good, support all of that, but what we want to do is to get the message over in Hampshire, and the best media, I think, is the BBC or ITV News programme somehow or other.
Thank you. I think it was you make a fair point. The challenge we had, I think 2 years ago, we launched it or relaunched the kind of sprinkler challenge locally, and there's always a balance between fronting those who don't have sprinklers in their buildings and those that and the work we're doing with City Council and the County Council actually to make sure sprinklers do become a matter of course. Where I think the effort needs to be put now, and certainly for the National Fire Chiefs Council and now the LGA, is the sense of housing legislation, and certainly Kit Malthouse has been lobbied, and in particular he's a focus of our attention, being one of our MPs. It's a useful point of contact for us, and we're making sure that we're in contact with him to explain the benefits of having retrofitted sprinklers. In fact, having new buildings built with sprinklers in them keeps everyone much safer, and it's a logical way forward. But that case is yet to be quite landed in England. It has been landed in other places, and that's the point we're making to Kit. So time will tell, but I think we'll get there in the end. We're just trying to put the right pressures on the right people.
Fine, thank you for that. Right, so we now move on to item 8, member development and comments. Now, before we move on there, we had some prior discussion about the title of this item, and the authority members feel that member development and comments is possibly historical, but we don't want to have a discussion about it this morning because we could be here for a long time. I think we feel that this is something that we might like to consider at an APAG meeting and consider a more appropriate title there. So is that something, please, that we could take forward for the future? With regard to member development, I don't think this is the area where we receive reports from those of you that are champions for a specific area of the fire service, unless it's something that is really pertinent to the meeting today or something that's really urgent. These are matters, I believe, for APAG meetings where we can have a more appropriate dialogue with our officers in private session. So, okay, Roger, you've been to the Fire Commission. So,
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I attended the Fire Commission, which is about just over a week ago. One of the main things was a presentation by Luke Edwards, who is the Director of Fire and Resilience at the Home Office, when he was talking about the reform programme, which is they're looking forward to, and also particularly the spending review. It says that the reform agenda is made up of 3 distinct pillars. This is what they're saying. First one is efficiency and collaboration, statutory duty for emergency services to collaborate, fire and rescue services declared savings of £22 million over 2 years, national contracts for key spend, fleet and clothing are 2 major items, and then into accountability and transparency, independent inspection, which we know all about the independent inspection because we've already had ours, creation of a new fire standards board, not too sure about that one, and Fire England to be launched in the summer of 2019. And the final pillar is a workforce reform, new national recruitment website for on-call firefighters. Well, we know we as Hampshire have been very much involved in that, so I think that's good from Hampshire's point of view that we were involved in designing the actual campaign, and I think we've taken a lot of credit for that as far as I understand. A targeted national campaign to provide diversity in recruitment of firefighters. I'm not quite sure where that one's actually got to. Some of the significant challenges is learning from Grenfell and new requirements around building safety, delivery or renewal of national capabilities, resilience and information system. Now that I think is one of the problems which has been announced recently, that the problems with the communication system, which it seems to me that whatever technological systems the government gets its fingers into, they seem to go wrong. I mean, I remember the regional control rooms, problem with technology there, and it seems to me to be a very similar situation to the current issues. Capability to respond to major incidents, and leadership, diversity, and workforce reform. And then it goes on to principles of good spending review, outcomes and public value, credible reform plan, and efficiency and productivity. Well, they're all good things which I think we do in Hampshire, but I think that I think the government is going to really put the screws upon fire authorities to make sure that they're actually all complying. Then they came up with this particular diagram which says enhancing fire and rescue services to the public, further reducing harm to individuals and economical damage over spending review period. And I think that, as I would see it, the main message they were trying to get over was improvements in procurement and the use of technology was one area, better data and improved transparency, acting upon whatever the inspection comes up with, increasing capacity for protection of work, leadership, diversity and implementation of the standards, and new dimensions renewal. Now, I'm not quite sure whether all the equipment which was in the new dimensions process, which I think was transferred from the government to the authorities for £1 a head or very minimal amount of money. Now, whether they're because at that point, what they were saying is that they're then your responsibility to replace and repair, etc. Well, now, whether they're suddenly going to have a change of heart and replace all those or improve them with more equipment, I'm not too sure. And also increase the impact of prevention work focusing on the most vulnerable groups. Well, that has always been our aim in Hampshire, so I don't see some of these things are going to have major effects upon us. So that was from Luke Edwards. We also had a presentation from Rod McLean, who is the head of Fire Safety Unit. And what he was talking about was the Hackett Review and the forthcoming Building Safety Consultation Paper will build on the review's recommendations and set out in the proposed fundamental reform of the system. And there is a consultation being done by the Home Office on testing all the work which is actually being done. So I imagine that we're involved in giving our views forward to the Home Office in the review. So there appears to be going to be some changes in the building regulations. Exactly what they will be until they come out and published, I don't think any of us know. But that is all sort of coming down the line. So that's a very brief sort of summary of what actually happened at the Fire Commission. Those were the two main papers. There were about 6 other items, and I think they went through in about 5 minutes. So you can see the importance of those compared with these two documents.
Well, thank you for that, Roger. You told us quite a lot there. I may have missed it, but was there anything said about blue light collaboration?
Yes, there
was
were
a statutory
it said
duty
service, yeah. Statutory duty of emergency services to collaborate, which is in the first item in Pillar 1 of their pillars.
Right. Well, we've seen pillars in the past, haven't we? And pillars are reappearing.
Pillars get knocked down too.
Yes. Do you wish to comment briefly on any of this? Yes.
I shan't comment on pillars. So, as you'll know, Luke Edwards and Rod McLean, Rod's not been down here, but I see him in my national role a fair bit. And Luke Edwards has been and visited here with the Deputy Director for Resilience. So, we're well connected in Hampshire, and also with Steve's former relationship from London Fire Brigade as well. That's a useful connection we have, as well as the other directors and work they do nationally. So we're well tuned into what is being talked about and being widely consulted about those things. One of the things I think is important via an APAG, as the Chairman mentioned earlier, is us bringing those matters to your attention when they're relevant. You'll get different access, obviously, from the LGA, the Fire Management Committee, but I think it's important that we debate those things as and when they come up, particularly around how much of a role Hampshire wants to play in the national agenda in that regard, how much contribution we will make to those things like new dimensions and resilience piece, as well as the other work we do around contribution towards the change in approved documents for building safety. So, yeah, all tuned into those things. Nothing you said which I didn't know, which is good. So, we'll continue to make sure that the LGA and us, via yourself, are connected in that regard. Thank you.
Chair, can I just add one little bit, which I didn't say, is that in the spending review, I think it is probably pretty certain now is there won't be a 4-year spending review this year. I think the spending review this year's will get carried forward to next year. And then there will be a 4-year spending review coming after that. The issue for us and for all fire authorities is the pension contribution problem. Now, the amount of money which we're talking about there is substantial. There it is over there. I can't remember the figure off the top of my head, but it was certainly around about £1 million, I think, that it would cost us. Now, hopefully, this year they're paying 97% or 93% of that figure to us, so we're not having to pay that. And hopefully, that is going to be also transferred over to next year. But I don't think there's been any confirmation of that yet. And also, it needs to be built into the spending review of the government. Otherwise, we will, and all authorities, are going to have a very big bill to find.
Sorry, I wasn't switched on there. Sorry. Right, so still under member development. Sharon, I think you want to just tell us something about Prince's Trust that took place in Southampton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. In April, early April, there was the final presentation of the latest Prince's Trust group in Southampton. It was the largest group ever to go through the programme. Only one person dropped out of it. It's a lovely event. If you haven't been to a Prince's Trust final presentation, it really is worth it, because these young people, they've faced significant challenges and they've seen through the programme. It really is a very worthwhile event. And I know that the young people in particular really appreciate the support they get from the Fire and Rescue Service. So, thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Sharon. I have been to a number of these events, and they're real tear-jerkers, aren't they, at times? They really are. Okay, so I think we've concluded that section. So we now move on to item 9 on your agenda, review of the trading company governance. So please turn to page 9, and I will invite the Chief Officer to present this report.
Chairman, before Chief Officer does, I'm assuming because I'm named and you yourself, we don't have to declare any interest in this document, although as directors we're coming off of the what's name, so I'm assuming we don't have to.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think you arguably have a personal interest in the item, but not one that precludes you from taking part in it. So. Well, we'll note it, because I think it's sensible to note it.
Thank you, Chairman. So, members, if I can take you to the paper. Essentially, this is as a result of our last meeting's conversation about the work that was done nationally to give guidance to fire authorities on operating trading companies where they belonged to the fire authority. So Grant Thornton was commissioned to do that work. That is the report which is now extant and has national impact. So we've been using that to govern or to help steer our recommendations to you, obviously via our own legal support as well from Paul and colleagues. So this paper really is the last part of that you asked me to look at, which was around the governance of the company itself. We talked about last time what the Fire Authority wanted to trade in, wanted the service to provide their trading company, and this one now is about governance. How do we actually govern the company? So our advice to you today is based on the fact of the interest have already been disclosed, but other than that we have no other interest in how it's governed, only to make sure it is legal and appropriate for its purpose. So what we've done to date, there's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing outside the scope of what the law says we can do. What we're trying to do is bring in line our next practice with what Grant Thornton suggests is good practice in their guidance, which has been nationally adopted. So in essence, currently the situation is that the Fire Authority appoints its directors as the shareholder of the company, and those directors then operate the company as you'd expect them to do and report back at the AGM. And now, we're suggesting there could be, although to date there's not been, there could be a conflict of interest between members who are appointed to that board of directors as the company in their roles as company directors and their roles as Fire Authority members, in as much as making the decisions on behalf of those two places. And it felt now, one with a smaller authority, but equally the direct challenge of conflict of interest, if two of you had to step out of the room every time, that would be quite difficult to continue, and wasn't necessarily in line with the good practice that Grant Thornton described. So the suggestion within this paper is that, firstly, that the Fire Authority decides not to appoint one of its own or two of its own to the board of directors, but instead to maintain your control of that company as shareholder, as sole shareholder, that you create a committee, which essentially would be a shareholder committee. So it would be a committee of the Fire Authority, not of the company, under the normal constraints of committees which are operated within the Act. And so it's conducted in the normal way that you're all very used to, but it was have the sole purpose of operating as shareholders of the company of 3S Fire. That would allow the proper separation to occur between the shareholder and the directors of the company. It would allow proper operation for you to operate as a fire authority, having reports back from the committee, rather than operating as the entire shareholder. So we think that is a much cleaner way of operating as a fire authority and a shareholder. It also prevents the need to have a shareholder representative. You have a committee and it reports back on a regular basis. The need for that committee to meet too often is relatively low compared to the time it would have taken you as directors to have company meetings is more often. So that again would take time, would reduce the time demand on you as members to do the things that perhaps you're here to do rather than operate the company. So the recommendations are described or the options are described in paragraph 24 for you to consider. And essentially they boil down to two choices. First of all, to create a shareholder committee under the role of the Fire Authority to operate as a shareholder of 3S Fire Limited, and to approve Appendix A, which describes who we are proposing at this time to be interim directors of the company. Or option 2 is you stay as we are and you appoint or reappoint the current directors to the board. My recommendation, as I described before, because of the national guidance and indeed our own experience of doing this, is that the option 1 is a far better way forward for the Fire Authority and indeed the company and individuals concerned, because of the potential conflict of interest that may continue to exist. So at that point, I'll take you to the Appendix A, proposed changes to board directors. So currently you have 2 members of the authority and Andy Bowers as directors, and have a non-exec director of Royston Smith. Royston Smith has attended his resignation from the board because of other matters which affect him. But equally going forward, Andy Bowers retires from the fire service, so therefore wouldn't be a normally appointed director from the Fire Authority anyway. So in line with, if you went for option 1, our suggestion is that we appoint 3 officers of my staff, Stu Adamson, ACO, Chief of Staff Matt Robertson, and Steve Apted, Deputy Chief, as the interim directors. So it allows them then to come back with proposals in the future to the shareholder committee, should that be approved, to create a new operating structure for the company, including new directors, to take it to the next stage of its life. So that's the proposal. I will happily take questions or comments at that point. Thank you, Chairman.
Any questions, members? So, from my personal point of view, I could not deny that as chairman of the authority, there clearly was the potential for conflict with myself being chairman of the company also. So I fully support the option 1, the recommendation. So if I can take you to page 13 there, I will read them out. That A, the authority establishes a shareholder committee and delegates to it the functions of shareholder of 3S Fire Limited. And, paragraph B, new directors be appointed to the trading company board as outlined in Appendix A as an interim measure while a further review overseen by the shareholder committee is conducted. Formal appointments of the shareholder committee and directors of 3S Fire Limited will be dealt with as part of the normal appointments process, which is dealt with under a separate item on this agenda. You all content with those recommendations? Thank you very much. Thank you. So we now move on then to agenda item 10, which is the appointments report. Who is presenting this report? Sorry? Oh, you are, Paul. Sorry, you're over that side. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. This report is one that should look familiar because a version of this appears each year at the AGM, and its purpose is to approve the proportional allocation of members to what will now be 2 committees of the authority, having just agreed to create the 3S Fire Shareholder Committee and then to make further appointments as set out in the report. So the first substantive item in the report is the size and political composition, and Appendix 1 sets out the membership and composition of the authority as a whole, and then Appendix 2 provides a proposed proportionality table in respect of the 2 committees. So when we come to the recommendations, the first item is to approve proportionality as per the table in Appendix 2. The report also covers the pension board, and the things to note there are that there is currently a vacancy amongst the scheme members and a process is being undertaken to fill that. So a further appointment will be made in future to fill that vacancy. And then the second item is in respect to Malcolm Eastwood, who his 4-year term expires on the 10th of June. It can be extended for up to 4 further years, but he's asked for it to be extended until only the 31st of March 2020. So the authorities asked to approve that, and then a further process would follow to fill the vacancy that would then arise. The report then at section 4 covers the other usual appointments for APAG, Principal Officer Pay Review Group, Member Development Liaison Champion, Minority Group Spokespersons, 3S Fire Shareholder Representative. Now, even though we've set up now the shareholder committee, there is unfortunately still a company law requirement that a corporate body that is a shareholder in a company has to nominate an individual person to act as the shareholder at the company's general meeting. So we're proposing that whoever is appointed chairman of the shareholder committee also be appointed as the shareholder representative, and all that would mean is that that member effectively carries out the decisions of the shareholder committee in the company's general meetings. And then the final item there is appointments of the 3S Fire directors as per the previous report. So the recommendations start on page 22 and probably need to just be worked through in sequence, and hopefully we'll end up then with all bases being covered. So the first recommendation is in respect to the proportionality table and to agree as per Appendix 2 the allocation to the committees.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think we can be in agreement with the table as it stands, because the table as it stands says that we should have an extra place and Labour should lose a place, because it says the balancing figure on the bottom line. What we as agree is that the figures of the appointments should stand as they are, and therefore we are going against the strict proportionality. Providing nobody objects to that, that is perfectly legal. So we're not agreeing with the bottom line.
Not switched on, I beg your pardon. So the nominated members will be Councillor Glenn, Councillor Vaughan and Councillor Chad. Can we ensure that that is recorded? Right, so
On Appendix 2, should it remain shareholder committee?
Yeah, it should be shareholder committee. I think there's a typo in
oh.
So we are shareholders even though we're not directors, right? So we're a committee holding position of shareholders.
You are, well, the authority itself is the shareholder. The committee is a shareholder committee, that's its name, and the authority is delegating the functions of shareholders to aspire to that committee. So the committee collectively will exercise the power and role of the shareholder of the company.
Okay, so
So it shouldn't be stakeholder, it should be shareholder.
but it does say shareholder, but the word stakeholder was used earlier, which
Yeah.
I actually prefer.
Well, that's a valid point, because the stakeholder has been used elsewhere in this report, hasn't it? So,
It was, I think it was from an earlier iteration of it.
Right.
I mean, I think you could say what's in a name, but the Grant Thornton advice, I think, referred.
Okay, I'm kind of going back, because all the directors have just stood down, Chairman, because it's been mooted that it would not be a good idea to have directors involved in this authority, which I totally agree with. Now putting on members of the committee, which we're calling shareholder committee. Now, I think that's pretty weird. I actually want to know, because what's in a name is quite important when you get into a legal wrangle, especially if this company goes into debt. So I really want to know what the legal position is of being a member, maybe even vice chairman of this, and chairman, if we go into serious debt because it's badly handled, and the only people who can get the blame will be the 3SFAR shareholder committee members. So where do we stand with that?
Because it's a limited company, any liabilities are limited to the amount of the shares, the share capital. So individually, the shareholder that is the authority is effectively protected from liability. The liabilities sit with the company itself, not the authority. And as shareholders or members on a shareholder committee, members would be indemnified anyway by the...
It's not just about indemnification, it's about personal reputation. It's about what would get into the press if there was a problem. And personal reputation is very important. So where do we stand with that in terms of press releases, et cetera, if there was a problem?
Sorry, Neil.
No, it's okay. No, sure. I think from our vantage point, if I can help answer the question, because it's a committee of the Fire Authority, it would have the normal machinery of our comms team. So it's this, the commercial interest stops, if you like, at the company itself. The fact that the authority has decided to have a trading arm in order to offset some of the issues around financial funding across our service, that decision the Fire Authority made some time ago. So the personal invitation is, as Paul's described, the issue around the Fire Authority defending itself if the company had a bad moment for any reason at all would be the same as if the service had a bad moment for any reason at all, would be us defending it, saying, well, this is what we intended to do. The reason why we set the company up in the first place is so that it could take risks that the service cannot take legally or wouldn't want to take either. So if anything, the risks sit with the directors. Sorry to mention this now, directors, but sit with the directors and not with the shareholder. But I understand the point. I think this isn't unusual in the public sector, and I think probably the county council has a similar setup. Now, whether it has a shareholder committee is a different question. I don't mind if you want to call it something different, if it works better in the public forum. But ultimately, trying to exercise the functions of the shareholder is important. We do it in this way rather than another way we used to do it.
Personally, I would have thought stakeholder committee is more appropriate, but, you know, we have to be guided by you.
I don't think there's a particular requirement for it to be called a shareholder committee, although that does kind of describe what it does. I mean, I think there is not a great deal of difference in terms of where the authority stands, in whether the authority as a whole exercises the shareholder function or whether a committee of the authority exercises it. The authority itself is the shareholder, and there is no getting away from that. So all that the authority is doing here is essentially saying, rather than us exercise that function as a full authority once or twice a year, we'll delegate it to a smaller committee that will do that on behalf of the whole authority. Now, it can be called a stakeholder committee legally, albeit it is exercising the functions of shareholder of the company.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I suggest that this is considered by the shareholder / stakeholder / whatever you want to call it committee when they meet? I don't really think it needs the full authority meeting to decide on this, and then they report back and say we're now going to be called, because at that point they can go into it in depth, they can have the proper legal conversations with the solicitor, and we can move on with the meeting.
Chairman, I'm not interested in moving on with a meeting unless we've got this absolutely wrapped up.
Yeah, I agree, Jonathan, because this is a report to the authority, and the authority is making a decision. I don't think we can delegate that decision to this committee that we're just setting up. So we need to decide ourselves what we're going to call this committee. And I'm guided by you, Paul, as to what is the appropriate decision to take here.
I don't really think I can give you much in the way of legal guidance as to what to call it, and I don't know if the Chief Officer has any views on, based on the Grant Thornton guidance, but...
I think, bear in mind, Councillor Glenn's concern was about the public interest, I guess. That would be the test. So it's not a legal basis, is it? Because essentially we know we can call it what we choose or what you choose as an authority. Its functions are clear legally, in as much as carrying out the functions of the shareholder. So I think in that case, they call it a stakeholder committee, and that would resolve some of the issues. It's still a function to carry out. I'd want to be careful about the confusion. It's not a broader stakeholder committee. It's a stakeholder committee of the company on behalf of the fire authority. That's the point. So I think, for the basis of the question raised, call it stakeholder committee today.
Okay, do I take it that you'd all be more content for it to be called 3S Fire Stakeholder Committee? Yes? Okay. Can we all agree that that's what it's going to be then? And we'll make that change. Is it okay? Right. So we've only got to number 8. We've got a long way to go here. So number 9, that with regard to the pension board, the authority consider the... Oh, sorry. Oh, right, sorry, I'm still with number 8. That the authority appoints members of the standards of governance. Oh, gosh. Sorry. Thank you for correcting me. So we were with what is the stakeholder committee. So I nominated 3 Conservative members. We've nominated 1 Liberal Democrat, 1 Labour member. We also nominated you, Councillor Price, to be chairman of the stakeholder committee. And we need to nominate a vice chairman for this stakeholder committee. Is that correct?
Chair, sorry, can I nominate Councillor Glenn to be vice chair of the committee?
Yep. All right. Okay. Right. Thank you for that. Right. So now we move back then to standards and governance, standards and governance is we don't need to have any changes there, do we? So can we just confirm that the standards of governance remains as it is now? You all agreed? Fine. Thank you. Right. Now I can move on then to number 9. That with regard to the pension board, the authority considers the position as set out in section 3 of the report and makes appointments in accordance with the board's terms of reference. So you're content with that? Agreed? Thank you. Number 10, that APAG include all appointed HFRA members as set out in para 4A of this report until the annual meeting of the authority in 2020. I think we all agreed that.
That particular one, do we need to actually add some wording in there about inviting TIG?
Yes.
From the Isle of Wight?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Well, that will formally follow next year, but in the interim, TIG, you are always invited to attend those. I know you have been to some of them. So, yes, thank you. Can we amend that? That's a very good, very valid point. So number 11, that the authority appoint 3 members and identify one of these as chairman for the informal working group for the review of principal officer pay as detailed in para 4B of this report until the annual meeting of the authority in 2020. Does that need to change? Does it? You're all content with that? That can carry on. That a member development liaison champion appointed as set out in para 4C until 2020. That's you. That can carry on. They're all content with that. That the minority group spokespersons for the Liberal Democrat group until the annual meeting 20 is confirmed as set out in 4D. Agreed? Agreed. That the chairman of 3S Fire stakeholder, I'll say there, be appointed as the shareholder representative of 3S Fire in pursuant to Article 39 of the Articles of Association of 3S Fire Limited as set out in paragraph 4E of the report until the annual meeting 2020. That will be you.
If the chairman is not there, would that automatically go to the vice chairman? Because I can foresee a technicality where we need the shareholders to vote on something with their share. The stakeholder, but no, at that point you become the shareholder when the vote is taken. And if for any reason Roger's not available, that means that the AGM of the limited company may not be able to take place because there's no shareholder. I'm looking at the solicitor.
Well,
Yes. Well,
this is a technical issue.
It
isn't
is, and it's one where in the past we've simply had one member appointed as the shareholder representative, and it's never, I think, caused a problem, but that's not to say it wouldn't. It's a valid point. Now, I think it's perfectly open to the authority to have the chairman, the chairman of the stakeholder committee or the vice chairman to act as the shareholder representative, as long as, I think that's legitimate, and actually it would be a useful way of avoiding a problem that's never arisen. So we could add that in to say that the chairman of the 3S Fire Stakeholder Committee be appointed along with the vice chairman of the committee in the absence of the...
Let's do that, can we?
Yeah.
Can we put that in there? Then that
It does
that squares
just
that
give us a
off
bit
then.
of leeway then.
Right, the power's really going to my head here.
Right, we're almost at the end of this one, so that the executive directors of 3S Fire be appointed by the authority pursuant to Article 18 and 19 of the Articles of Association of 3S Fire Limited as set out in paragraph 4F of the report until the annual meeting in 2020. Agreed? Oh, hooray, we've got through all of that. Good, thank you. Right, so moving on swiftly, agenda item 11, minor amendments. Sorry. Oh, well, any comments? You all agreed? Anything you want to add, Paul?
In light of the previous item, I will need to amend the reference to the 3S Fire Shareholder Committee in here and make it Stakeholder Committee. That was the main change. Everything else is just sort of very minor and because of changes in names of roles. One other thing just to note, in respect to the terms of reference of the Pension Board, I am aware that the Standards and Governance Committee will be considering in July the Pension Board's terms of reference and may make some further changes. So I would just ask that we amend slightly recommendation 11 so that it reads, the authority delegates authority to the clerk to finalise a new version of the Constitution containing the amendments at Appendix A, and then we add, and any further amendments to the terms of reference of the Pension Board made by Standards and Governance Committee, and consequential changes to numbering and formatting, etc. And that way I can then just pick those amendments up after Standards and Governance and put them all in the final version.
Right.
So if you're all happy.
Thank you, Paul. Did you all pick up that amendment there?
Did, but I guess question one point that Paul's made is that if at the Standards and Governance Board there is a disagreement on what those changes could be, it could come back to the authority to make the final decision. I'm not saying there will be, but you need to have that in there so that if it does come back to the fire authority, then it's their decision which actually would go through.
Yeah, I mean, that's technically correct. And obviously, unless Standards and Governance actually agree amendments, they won't make it into the Constitution. So, yeah.
So are you all subject to what's just been mentioned there, are you all in agreement with those recommendations on page 29? Agreed? Thank you. So stand by for the fire alarm in about a minute's time. And in the meantime, turn to page 45, annual performance. Turning to page 45, who's presenting this? Is it Shantha? Shantha, can I just ask, we've got, I think, within the report, I think it's from page 81 onwards, we've got 6 delays mentioned in the report. I wonder whether you could, in presenting your report, just... Oh, we'll wait for that.
Another delay there, Chairman.
Yeah.
Perfect timing.
Right, good. So what I was saying, Shantha, we've got some delays mentioned. I wonder, in presenting your report, whether you could just go through those delays and give us a bit of an explanation as to
Sure, no problems.
what's happening with those. Right, over to you then.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, members, ladies and gentlemen. So what you've got in front of you is the annual performance report, so for the last year. And what I'm going to do is draw out some overarching themes before I'll go into some specifics for you, specifically the review of the service plan and looking at the delays, and then take any questions that you will have. The format you should be fairly familiar with, both for the performance report and also for the service plan. So as I said, it's looking back on the previous year for our operational and organisational performance, which is the first appendix. And then the second one, of course, is the penultimate year of our 5-year service plan, and making a link to the next agenda item, which of course is the service plan refresh. So there'll be some parallels between the two. So really, just in terms of our performance approach, clearly by the time that the report gets to you, it's been looked at through our Performance and Assurance Board and also our executive group. And also a really important part of how we look at performance within the organisation is benchmarking. So looking at standards of performance, both against our previous performance, but also similar and like organisations, so within the family group. And of course, that's really helpful with the increasing amount of fire and rescue services that have taken part in the HMI inspection regime. As that's getting more established, that's giving us more material to benchmark ourselves against. So looking at the first part, so our organisational and operational performance, in paragraph 9, the text in bold, you may notice, is actually quoted from the HMI report of last year, which I felt was very important because our overarching theme is that we continue to demonstrate a good performance, specifically around the efficiency and effectiveness of how we protect the public within Hampshire. And I wanted to pull out some themes from that next section. So fire casualties. This is something that has been referenced by HMI, and over the past year we've had 105 fire-related casualties, which is good. Moving on to our availabilities, so we measure specifically, and I know that's something you're very interested in, is the availability of our retained, our on-call personnel and appliances. And whilst the commentary around that, the investment in RDS support officers is something that you will be familiar with, I wanted to make a broader point about how availability is linked in with our new vehicles. So whilst the reduction is there in the availability, we see an increase likely with the new vehicles and variable crewing. And the example I'd like to use of a fire station for that is Whitchurch, which is very much a bellwether, so an indicator fire station. And in a previous report to the authority, when we were focusing on RDS, we said that Whitchurch Fire Station has seen an improvement of 18% in its availability at night and 39% during the day since the intermediate capability was stationed locally. And this is very much an indicator of how we expect further improvements to be shown with the rollout of the intermediate capability more broadly across the service. The other point around availability is there's a tremendous variation between daytime and nighttime cover, and our latest county-wide statistics show an average availability during the daytime of 60% and in the at nighttime 88%. So from one perspective, one might suggest that the using an average availability is perhaps a less worthy indicator. And we also see that between, not just there's a variance between day and night, but also location specific. So examples being of availability as low as 24%, but as high as 100%. So again, the average perhaps not being, for us needing to dig beneath the figures. The other point that I wanted to draw out was around our achievement, so in paragraph 12, of the 880 critical response standard, and talk more broadly about average response times. And whilst you've seen a marginal decline with the previous year, I think that amounts to a 3-second difference. If we split out the rural and urban response, we find that our urban response times average out at 6 minutes 24 seconds and our rural at 10 minutes 5 seconds. And again, looking at the impact or assumed impact of new vehicles, we thought that having our new vehicles would we assume there'd be a faster response. But actually, this hasn't really impacted, because what we're finding is that the new vehicles are actually at our whole time locations. But again, an outlier, I use the example of Whitchurch. There's a 20-second improvement, which is related to the increased availability and not needing to wait for a crew of 4. So what this really does is I'm hoping this gives you a flavour of the move in the right direction as is when we start to roll out the new fleet from next year onwards. Moving on to another point that is contained within the report that I felt worthy of highlighting in this meeting was AFAs, so automatic fire alarms. And the headline perhaps suggests a worrying trend, but actually if you look at the table, the figures contained within that tells a different story. Now, we're able to manage out some alarms, so perhaps those that are created through unwanted signals at a workplace, and those are low. The biggest rise is in what we call AFAs with good intent, and those are more challenging to manage out, because what they ultimately are is the public taking action when they think they're helping and doing something useful, but of course they're mistaken. So that is very much some highlights from our operational and organisational performance. The service plan within the cover report, obviously that's looking back over last year, so the penultimate year, year 4 of the 5-year plan. And under each of those paragraphs, there's a summary of each of the priorities and the activity. But perhaps if it's more useful, I'll go straight to the appendix, which contains the delayed, and then offer some explanation about those. Of course, at any point, if you wish to ask any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Thank you for that. So, questions, members? Yes, who's first? Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Before we move on to the service, Shanta, going
Sure.
back to the critical response time,
Yep.
how does that compare with our family group that we compare ourselves to? Do we know? Have we asked them what their response times are like?
Yes, so following the Fire Authority meeting in September or later in the autumn, when we were asked to go away and look specifically at how we're doing with respect to critical response, one of my teams did some detailed analysis into that. And we looked at the family group. We looked at services that are similar in different ways, if you like. So isolating our most rural areas. So say, for example, the New Forest group, and looking at services that are similar in that perspective. And the challenge was actually the Home Office don't actually measure those that statistic, and moreover, the way that services record that varies. So it's quite a challenge in terms of, if you like, the adage of, comparing apples with apples. However, what we did find was where we were able to identify, for example, other rural services, certainly, and we know that's the area where our response, as I've quoted the figures to you earlier, is slightly slower, we were outperforming. So that was a positive message, and that's certainly something that I could come back to with a more in-depth answer, but it's quite challenging to look at because of the variance with which services measure, and indeed when they even push the button in terms of measuring that response.
Thank you, Chris. Can I just ask, I've got a number of questions to ask on different items in the report, but can I just ask a general overriding question to start with? If I can use Emsworth as an example, Emsworth Fire Station responds quite a lot of the time into West Sussex, and I think that West Sussex actually pay us for that service. Now, in stats point of view, if Emsworth attended a RTA in West Sussex, would that figure be in these figures that we get here? Because it could make, and particularly if there are deaths involved in RTAs, it could make Hampshire's figures look worse for the county of Hampshire than the service, if you see what I mean. And I'm just wondering, how do you treat statistics for a appliance attending into another county?
So they'll be treated in the same way after, and as you know, after any incident, when our crews return back to base, they complete the incident recording system, IRS. So that would be contained within our own data. So we would be collecting on it. I suppose what I can't specifically say from that report is how much of that was, I don't have those figures to hand now, was over the border, but we would be able to get that. If they are Hampshire officers, Hampshire firefighters, Hampshire resources, then clearly we would be monitoring and measuring how quickly they respond, etc.
If I can just add, sorry, and maybe to further to Shanta's answer, so deaths and injuries particularly aren't counted if they're outside our county border. They're in this case where Sussex is. But don't forget, we tend to count the first attendance. So in a rare event that will be the first attending over the border, in some places that does happen, that will be counted. But often the incident is transported across to the figures for the other service. So again, rarely are we the first attendants over the border. There are certain areas we know that's the case, but we're really conscious. But taking Chad's point, the thing we've become much more aware of now in these figures, that's why we think we can see an improvement happening in these figures, not only because of the vehicles, but actually our awareness on data. Some of our staff are filling in these forms in very diligently, but actually the figures can be clearly wrong when you consider the numbers which end up going on the forms. There's some outliers which describe response times of 30 minutes or something, which clearly isn't right, but the numbers clearly are wrong. We just need to pay more attention internally to our data. Now it's a very small percentage of the number you've got here, but we're determined to make this number be factual. I think that's part of what the HMI has done for us, because every quarter or so we're pushing out our data to the national HMI team, and we're taking, and we did one last week, we're taking a really conscious effort to say, is that number correct? What's causing this number? So as well as these meetings, but internally a much clearer focus on what our numbers are telling us and what it means and what we need to do about it. So that you can be assured that these things will improve, not because necessarily our performance will improve, but because we pay more attention to what the numbers actually mean and what we need to do to make sure they are correct in the first instance.
So following on from that, the questions I have, first of all, on page 58, there's actually a typo error, because we're comparing, it's 18, 19. It's in the people killed in road traffic collisions. I think the second one should be 18. The ones which I'm most concerned about, and I think I raised last year, was the point about the critical attendance times. Now, when one looks at it's gone down by 0.2% on the average across the county, it's worrying that it's still going down. It is, I find, worrying. The one which I also find interesting is the urban critical, which really, I suppose, will be mainly full-time stations. And that is going down. Is there some underlying reason? Because staff are there all the time, so therefore it should be out within the minute. As I think the laid down time is it should be straight out the door. So what is happening there? And if one looks at the figure achieved last year of 77.1%, is only 0.1% above what you hope to achieve for everyone in this year. And if the full-time are not doing very well, the chances and the hope of ever getting to 77% this current year is, I would say, a very big ask.
I'll let Shantha come back in, but one of the things Shantha did stress is the weak nature of this particular measure. It's an average response time, so it's not telling you what you think it's telling you. That's not the answer of someone who's trying to hide the performance issue, but actually underneath all this. So the reason, for example, hold time and response times have changed is because they're spending more of their time going outside their areas. So they are the first in attendance because another part-time station or on-call station is not available. So they're having to travel longer to get to the incident. So that's a kind of a connected item. So the response speeds of our staff aren't getting slower. That's my point about average response times. Don't actually measure the thing we think we're measuring. They measure the overall outcome number, which is often made up of a subset of lots of different factors. So the fire engines aren't getting slower. Our staff aren't getting slower getting out the door. They're just going to different places sometimes. The average or our pattern of call rates and where we're being called to are a lot less now in the city centres. That used to be all the fire alarms would happen in the city centres, therefore you got a peak in really fast response times. So that's changing because we're reducing AFAs. If we wanted to succeed at this, we'd encourage AFAs in the city centres because we'd get there really quickly and we'd get a nice quick tick. We'd include other things which we do really quickly. And actually, we're trying to be honest about the number, and I think Shantha's alluded to that. That's why I think there is a conversation to have with you in the future about what's a sensible measure for the service's performance and what it actually means. I think that would be a better way of doing that than an average response time across the entire year. Shantha, did you want to add anything to what I've just said?
Thank you. So how effective our response is, that's our challenge, isn't it, in terms of how we measure it. And I certainly would advocate that in the future we consider other ways we might wish to do that. So if we can, think about how effective our response is, and then we take something that the Fire Authority are very aware of, which is our SAVE tactic, which is something that we've brought out in the last 2 or 3 years, that has fundamentally changed how successful we are at tackling fires. But how do we reflect that within a figure? If we also consider all of our broader prevention work, and that actually is a response, not the moment a fire engine turns out of a station, but actually the point at which we as an organisation engage with an individual, a business, etc., then that's another way of looking at it. However, the outcomes that you see, the fatalities are thankfully reducing. The casualties are reducing as well. That's something that HMI have noted us for. So despite this particular measure, our outcomes are better and more improved. But the challenge is how we articulate that in a specific measure.
It's a very difficult area because these are the figures which are going out into the public arena, and it doesn't look good for us. My other question is on page 66 about arson task force, is that charged and convicted in those 2 columns, is that it appears that convicted of those charged in 16 and 17 were fairly high. But it seems that in 18, those that were convicted against those charged has gone down as a percentage, or appears to have done. It's a very small figure there. And is there anything there which we as a service can improve in evidence so that, because CPS are not going to charge somebody and they're pretty sure they've got a good case, well over 50% to get a conviction. is there something which we need to improve to make sure they do get that evidence in conviction?
So the answer to that is not going to be easy to give you, and as much as sometimes there's a lag. Convictions can take a long time after point of charging, but also, to what extent is it measuring our success as a part of that? So yeah, it's an interesting concept. We pride ourselves, don't we, on the fact that we catch arsonists when they commit offences in this county, and they're brought to justice. Something we continue. Our arson task force, the joint venture with the police, is very much want to kind of to focus on in the future. But this is a really good test of how effective that is when compared to others. We still have the highest arrest rate in the country. So the fact is someone is arrested doesn't mean they necessarily get convicted, and that's a matter of the criminal justice system. But you're right. I think it's a good, fair challenge to come back and say to what extent does it rely on our evidence and our expertise in that regard. And I don't know the answer to that at this stage. It's something we can go and test.
Accept and understand the actual arrest rate, and then it all goes down a sliding scale. And I accept that when somebody's arrested, they're not necessarily going to be charged, and understand all that. But it's the charge, because they're pretty sure there should be a conviction out of it. And it's that point that I guess may have some concern.
Jonathan, I know you want to come in, but can I just, on that respect, the last paragraph there refers to evaluation by Portsmouth University. Have we received anything from them to sort of comment on that and what's being raised here?
Again, I'll go back to the point I made earlier, Chairman. I think I want to look into that idea of to what extent is that conviction rate as a result of anything we may be doing. I would suggest not I've seen, but we'll go back and check that.
So I can't give you specifics, Councillor Glenn, but in terms of those themes, in terms of new developments and access to, as you're aware, we have an officer who is embedded within the County Council, so we get involved in the consultation of builds, and we are able to influence at an officer level and have visibility of plans. Also, in terms of sort of specifics around parking, so lazy behaviours perhaps that members or thoughtless behaviours members of the public may have in terms of parking where they shouldn't. is something that we have been involved with through social media. Certainly over the last couple of years, there's been various campaigns. I can't remember exactly what they're called, but they're to do with effectively don't park on the yellow hatched area, etc. But then when there are areas, historic areas such as Portsmouth, and obviously the narrow streets there, that is something where we work with local residents to advise on that. But as I said, I can't give you specifics, but we are sort of aware of that. Yeah.
So let me add, in fact, Andy led a campaign last year now about Need My Space, was that the Need My Space? And particularly relevant to urban areas where people double park or don't leave enough space. And now we do hear some stories from our crews, exactly as you described, saying, gosh, that's really hard to get to. To what extent is affecting our response times? The overall figure is hard to say, but it's a fair question we can go and check, as Shantha suggested. The idea of planning and involved in that, we are to some extent involved in planning. We do get consulted at a stage of planning for access, not so much about the building. We'd like to be more involved in the building. We do get consulted around the access issues for certain types of building, whether we can reach them okay, and there's a turning circle and those sorts of things. It's often the behaviours of sites after it's been built which is the issue for us. But to what extent it affects the numbers, how quickly someone pushes the button and say we're here, we couldn't say at the moment, but something we'll certainly go and look at.
Mr. Chairman, on that particular point, it was from here that we actually sent a recommendation to the LGA to ask that it should be included in the building regulations that we were a full consultee on planning, rather than being in some authorities just doing it as a right. And if we are then a proper consultee, if we object, then there's a reason to refuse it. If we're just consulted without being a proper consultee, then the planning authority can't object to it. And that's the problem. Until we can get it changed nationally, which we've been trying to do, then it's very difficult.
On that particular point, I mean, I no longer sit on the planning committee at the City Council, but I have done previously, and I know that the Fire and Rescue Service is a statutory consultee on access when there's a development of a sizable development, for example, Centenary Quay, sort of in Woolston, sort of over on the southeast of the city. So if we do it in Southampton, I think that the Fire and Rescue Services across the country are statutory consultees, aren't they? But on the access to buildings.
So if I can confirm, you're absolutely right. So we are on access to building and means of firefighting, so water supplies, that sort of thing. We're statutory consultees. So, and we do get access to planning committees on that basis. The proactiveness of local authorities, certainly in Hampshire, because of the position that fire authorities have taken, is improving, and some already well positioned. So the conversations that I have with chief executives across Hampshire is exactly that. Please keep us in mind, even if we may not be statutory. Just let us know about things you think should be brought to our attention as a sort of a voluntary basis for the time being. But I think more concern from there is why we started this was the changes being put into some buildings without us knowing, because they weren't moving to a statutory purpose for us. We'd moving to housing, for example, we wouldn't be involved, whereas we might do for access.
The last point is page 69. Is the officers are saying is the aiming for 77% on attendance this year. The note that I wrote to myself by the side of that, that's a very big ask based on the figures that we have. Do you agree that it's really a realistic figure or not?
comment on?
I'm happy to. I think I would agree, based on our current performance, that jump is a jump. However, I draw you back to my early comments, more broader comments around availability and response times and the expected impact of our changing fleet capabilities. So whilst that may be ambitious in the immediate short term, I would expect over the medium term that to be realistic. Yeah.
Just about, I mean, I'd always want to hold us to the where reasonable, the plan we originally agreed with, what the authority agreed, because that's our benchmark. Varying kind of outcome targets halfway through the year is always a challenge for me. But I think the point is we come back to you at some point in the IRMP cycle, which is coming up this year, to talk to you about different ways of measuring success. And not because we don't like this one, because it's hard to achieve, because we don't believe it measures the right things in terms of what actually we are achieving. It's a facet of lots of other things and not much to do with our performance. So that's what we're trying to describe in the future plan for how you might hold us to account, we think, more effectively.
Well, the percentage is coming down, isn't it? So it's getting worse.
Yeah. So the average is getting worse. That is the point. But stabilising in terms of its getting worseness, to use a technical term. If I may, Chairman, I want to make a general point about that, because I wouldn't want my last comment to go unguarded. But the point is that across the country you're seeing this type of performance, as in response times getting harder to hit, or getting we're getting slower, it would seem, on the face of it, attending incidents, and that's happening across the country, including services which are resourced by whole-time staff completely. Now that's a matter of a number of factors which we don't need to readdress here. But the fact is that the danger is we start to think it's being caused by things that it may not be being caused to. It's certainly not being caused by lower staffing, because we're not lower staffing. It's certainly not being caused by slower turnouts, because we know that that's not the case either. So the factors which are causing it, one, the nature of the calls, where they are, and not in the city centres, as I mentioned earlier, and availability in some of our places, which we know is increasing, and Shantha mentioned that earlier about some of our pumps are more available now. So this lag effect will start to come in effect. I'm hoping that curve will start to tick the other way in the future. That's my commitment, at least. But I do want to make sure that your analysis of this performance is a bit more, we give you a bit more sophisticated insight into what causes this overall number, which we are getting there fast. I think that's the case across the country as well. These average response times, I don't think, are a very sensible way of measuring the British Fire and Rescue Service, if I'm honest.
Right. Sorry?
You wanted the Shantha to talk about the delay factor.
Yes. Yes, please. Yes. The delay factor, Shantha. From page 81 onwards.
So looking at Appendix B, the first delay is under the communications and engagement priority, stronger priority, and it's around the development of a customer insight tool. That, as it says, is in progress, and the reason for the delay is simply that there has been other it's a fairly small team that's developing that particular tool, and there have been other tasks that have been of a higher operational priority, but it is in progress. Moving on to then the bottom of the knowledge priority, and the policies being in line with the services policy framework. I'll draw your attention to the bottom sub-paragraph, which is around the reallocation of resources. However, I want members, if I can assure members that where there are policy gaps, we are identifying them, because obviously we recognise that we don't want to be have out-of-date policies at all. So that is an area of great priority, obviously under Steve Apter's leadership going forward. So then moving on to the people and leadership area, members will note that that is the area which probably has the most delays, and that's not to suggest that work isn't taking place. I think if you reflect on the findings of the HMI report last year, where we were found requires improvement in looking after our people, that's clearly an area that we are absolutely focused on. And I suppose what this also shows, the service plan, is that's one set of improvement activities that we have committed to. But we also have running concurrently with that, with the HMI action plan, which I'm bringing to to a future standards and governance meeting. And I suppose to, again, assure members, though it might be slightly difficult when you see delays in front of you, that there is absolutely work taking place within this area. And we recognise that the area also needs to be resourced appropriately. So we're internally sort of balancing out our resources to make sure, under Molly Rowland's leadership as a strategic lead for some of those activities, that she has the actual resources that is required to drive some of those activities forward. And then moving on to the one in technology, I believe Matt's going to add something around the vision interface.
Thank you, Shantha. So, members, on the bottom of page 90 of your packs, the one delayed item within technology is to do with, it's a technical interface between a number of different IT systems, which ultimately provide availability. So tell our control centre who's available, what skills they have, and that they're sufficiently could be deployed to the incident. This has been on an action plan for a number of years, and the delays are down to the complexity, so the technical complexity of providing a stable link between a number of different infrastructure setups. So our own infrastructure setup here, a network separately run by Capita across 3 fire and rescue services, which is the National Fire Services Partnership, our availability system, which is called Firewatch, and also a number of incident recording systems. So we use one called Boss Mobile, and there's the user interface for it. So as you can imagine, quite a complex technical picture. And given the importance of maintaining stability of the system, so that we can at all times provide respond to emergency calls and deploy crews sufficiently, we've taken a very risk-averse approach to any changes and rollouts. So to date, there's no adverse impact as a consequence of this linkage to our operational delivery, but we do have, we've currently successfully tested a solution to this interface within our own HFRS network, which is really positive, and that will now go into a test phase across the 3 services, so across the wider partnership. So yes, it is delayed. It is a priority, and the teams are very much focused on it. The time frame for this at the moment has been forecast to be the end of the calendar year, so to the end of 2019. But that is due to ensuring that there's a safe way of testing this and rolling a solution out. So, so yes, it is delayed, but hopefully assurance that it is being looked into.
Thank you. Jonathan, you want to come back
Thank you
on
for
it?
those, for bringing us up to date. Let's just start with page 90, which is the technology one. This equipment's already been put in, so it's just a matter of interfacing. It's the problem. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Because therefore, I presume, since the work's been done by Capita, is that you mentioned?
So Capita are one of the partners,
Okay.
yeah.
If there's been a failing by the consultant, or what we want to call it, are we due compensation for this sort of thing? I'll stop with that for the moment.
Yeah, so that's not a yes or no answer, I'm afraid, but that is a it's very complicated. So I completely see where your view is, yeah. But it is there's a partnership. So in effect, there's a collaboration with a number of different services. So it's less of, so in that sense, so with the Capita, there's a commercial relationship, but beyond that, there isn't anything that we can recall on. Equally, it is worth noting that we haven't paid the bill, if you like, in terms of the arrangement. So there's still a contractual negotiation that could take place around it. I say this has been outstanding for a number of years now in terms of trying to work through the solution.
Well, I trust you to work on that. The first two, if I go on, Chairman, page 85, is there a new date for that? And on page 87, a new date for that. The others have got dates written in, but have you got, we need to put in new dates for completion or expected completion. What, which one?
85, we're having by June.
If
Yeah,
I can
I don't know if
come-
that's
oh,
a
sorry.
date, is that? You know, it's only next month.
So if I can come back on that. So that's, Councillor Glenn, that's a really neat segue into the next agenda item, which is the service plan refresh, which will look at reshaping some of those priorities, removing some that have been completed, etc. So hopefully that will be addressed in the next one, but I'm guessing we can pick that up if then.
And just to confirm, as you can imagine, the executive group, so the directors here with me, we've gone through these dates to make sure that if it is next month, it's jolly well going to be done by next month. And that's because I don't want to come back again and say there's another delay.
Sorry, switch on again. From what you've said there, Shantha, that moves us neatly on to the next agenda item. Unless there's anything else that members you want to bring up under item 12, can I...
I think we should congratulate the HFRA on all the other completions.
Yes, yes. Can I take you to page 50 to the recommendation then that Hampshire Fire and Rescue Authority notes the performance for 2018-19 as detailed in this report? All agreed?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Right, so agenda item 13 then, Shantha, service plan annual review. Oh, sorry, it's you, Andy. I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, pleased to represent to you what will be my last paper
Yes.
of many. I'm hoping the fact is that item 13 isn't an ill omen. In terms of what we've just discussed, we've looked back at the last 12 months of performance and given you that update there. As you're aware, we produce a 5-year plan. You have a 5-year integrated risk management plan, and the service develops a plan that sits underneath that, which is our mechanism of delivering against those priorities. So what you have here is an overarching report with a single recommendation, I'll come back to in a moment, a refresh of the services plan for its final year. We are in the last year of a 5-year plan, and you'll be aware that on the horizon is obviously the work to create the Combined Fire Authority and work with the Isle of Wight and to achieve the requirements of the Her Majesty's Inspectorate Action Plan. So what this final year refresh does, it's a light touch, it brings those things together, it puts us in a good place for the publication of a brand new IRMP, which Steve and the team have already begun working on, and we'll talk to you at other opportunities about as we develop that. So a brand new plan as of 2020. This paper gives you the current annual refresh to take us through to March 2020. It refreshes all those priorities. As Shantha has said, the ones that which are complete have been removed. Some have been amalgamated. And importantly, what we have done is brought in the HMI CFRS action plan here as well, so that we're working off of a single plan rather than having two potentially conflicting plans pulling us in different directions. So in an attempt to simplify, it's an attempt to consolidate in preparation for a full refresh, a full review, a brand new plan in April 2020. So there is, as I said, a single recommendation of the report that you approve that service plan and the priorities that sit underneath it for this current year. And as I said, the appendices are the plan itself, the service plan for the final year, and those priorities updated, refreshed, in some cases amalgamated. I'd need to check the exact wordage in terms of all of those ones you've just asked about, but certainly the one around the Capita Firewatch interface is a carry forward. It features in the next plan because we know we need to achieve that as part of the ongoing work. Some of them have been amalgamated with other objectives, so the wording will have changed slightly, but I can assure you that none of the current priorities have just been discarded because we haven't achieved them. They are all in there somewhere and all are being done under business as usual. So I commend to you the report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Right, thank you for that, Andy. Yes, well, I think you have an amendment that you wish to propose to page 98, do you not?
Well, I'm not actually proposing an amendment. I'm just asking a question first of all.
Well, alter a
yeah,
word,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think you
that's
wanted
right,
there,
yeah.
didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, if you look under the second column on page 98, more efficient, and it says we respond quicker. When one looks at the figures which we've seen earlier on, we're not responding quicker. I think there just needs to be a slight change to that wording. You know, you could put in there, we will respond quicker, or something like that. Because if somebody actually looks at the previous document and looks at this one, the two don't marry together.
So I can see the point. These are supposed to be statements of the intended future rather than what we've achieved. So if you look at the rest, they say we understand risk better. I think they all but that one could be a statement of the past, but this one is supposed to be a statement of the future as well. So I think I wouldn't want to diminish the fact that we intend to respond quicker, and you know, the other things it says. I'm just not sure we need to change the tense of this particular sentence because they're all meant to be future facing.
If I may, Chief, as well, this is about the service as a whole rather than just the operational response. So we will respond to community safety requests, we'll respond to protection advice, we'll respond in our co-responding role quicker. So it's about the whole of the service rather than just, as the previous debate was about, operational response times.
Where I'm coming from is looking at how is the Mr. and Mrs. Average who picks up this, and very few people will, I know, and accept that, but if they pick it up and read it, how they interpret it, that's really what it's all about, I think. And that's why I understand, I can grasp what is being said, but I just seem to think it's, you know, it's sending the right message, but it's how people pick it up and perceive it, and particularly if they've looked at other documents.
Okay, on that basis, because I do notice there's another one, we are building on our established medical response, so that's in a different tense. So I think probably we'll correct the tense, so we put we wills in them to make that point.
It does make a significant difference, actually. Right, so, Jonathan, you wanted to... All right, anybody else? No? So, okay, well, thank you for that, Andy. So, recommendation is on page 95, that the service plan annual review for 2019-20 be approved by the Hampshire Fire and Rescue Authority. All agreed? Oh, with that very minor amendment, yes. Sorry? Yes, carry on, yeah.
Chairman, thank you. And to add to something you said earlier, I guess on behalf of the service, I want to thank Andy Bowers for the work he's put in, and his team, of course, in getting this particular plan together. Certainly for me, and hopefully for you as an authority, having Andy's history and experience and knowledge about where we've got to, I was absolutely keen that he was part of making sure that the changeover between the last year and this year, in as he starts to step out of the service, was absolutely seamless. And I think he's done a great job of doing that. And this report, this plan, really links the 2 years together, and then hands over to Steve very bravely to say into the future, then Steve with the authority. So I'd like to thank him for that work.
Can we make sure that's minuted?
Yes, indeed. I think the authority would all want to endorse your comments there, very, very much so. So thank you again, Andy, for all that you've done. Thank you. Right, we now move to agenda item 14, page 121 in your agenda. Annual Governance Statement 2018-19. Do we need any comment, discussion about this? You all happy to go to the recommendation there and accept this report? Yeah. Agreed? On page. That the annual governance statement as set out in Appendix A is approved by Hampshire Fire and Rescue Authority. Agreed. So now we move swiftly on to agenda item 15, page 137. annual statement of equality. Right. So, that's you, Neil, is it? Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Just so you're aware, Molly Rowland, our Director of People and Organisational Development, is away today. Now, pleasingly, she is on the National Leadership Programme for the Fire and Rescue Service. So another one of our team that will be qualified at the highest level across the UK Fire and Rescue Service. And so she has a good reason not to be here. The negative side of that, of course, is I have to present this particular paper. Now, what I would say about this paper, you'll be aware, because I know you've had it presented to you every year, there is a statutory requirement to set equality objectives every 4 years. So we're within that 4 years, but we were keen to come back and report to you on progress. And not only because the HMI found some challenging issues in our organisation, but because it's just really, really important to us. This is an important part of our governance to make sure your commitment to driving these objectives is clear, so that I can get on and deliver those across the organisation and create the workforce and indeed the service for our communities of the future. So, to give you some sense of this report, the objectives remain the same, so we need to reconfirm those today to make sure you're comfortable. But our profile across our workforce, our quality profile, is still a matter of ongoing concern. But I would want to reassure you today about the good work that's going in to make that better. So we are, as today, below national average for a number of women in our whole-time roles, but we are above national average for women in our on-call staff, which is a really, really good step. And we believe this is due to the on-call campaign that, as you said earlier, we've led, and that has led to some access to bits of our community, parts of our community that we'd never been able to get to before. So, and praise to the on-call support officers that we employed some 2 or 3 years ago. They've done a great job at continuing to encourage and manage people into the service, because some of these people have busy day jobs and busy lives, and trying to keep them in track with the process of recruitment is important that we give them the support that they require. Black and Asian minority ethnic groups are still underrepresented, very low, 1.2%. This is not representative of our local community, and we've got lots of work to do there. We're developing greater insight into those groups to make sure we identify those barriers which may exist into why they are not naturally joining our organisation, why we are finding them hard to reach. And a great example used recently, I heard elsewhere, is when you see a fire engine drive down one of our streets across Hampshire, across the cities, or indeed the Isle of Wight, is when you look through the window of those fire engines, what do you see? And that's one of our challenges. You see mainly white men, and that's our challenge. So how accessible does that feel if you're from one of those groups? That's the challenge we have in hand, to try and break some of those barriers down. So I just wanted to stress the equality objectives, making good progress against those objectives, key milestones. So publication of a positive action statement, we've publicised that, and we are delivering it, and today's actually your equality objectives are part of that. We've had lots of have-a-go days to support recruitment, and we've had many, and I know many of you around this table have been involved in that as well, and that's been widely encouraged for people to take part in, to understand the challenges. To add to that, the idea of launching our cadet units will again break down barriers for young people. Young women particularly will start to see the benefits of saying, I could do this if I wanted to do this for a career, because they've been involved at a much younger age. And that's something we know will pay dividends back. We've seen that in places like London and other places that have been having longer standing cadet units. Targeted use of social media. We've been very successful in our target media approach, in as much as making this open to everybody. And it goes back to some of our graphics we developed, and thank you to the comms team nationally, to show these are everyday people doing this important non-everyday job, but anyone can do it. Inclusive leadership seminar for middle managers, really get our managers to understand what inclusivity is, and making sure we understand the benefits of diversity, not in the sense of making sure that people look different or they're from different backgrounds, but actually people with different thoughts and thinking that probably are from different backgrounds are really important to our decision making. And we're making progress towards achieving the National Inclusion Standard, which is a really important standard. We're getting help from the Inclusive Employers team, which is going to help us really to demonstrate our commitment to the standards that should exist. Now, lastly, I wanted to summarise for you the recent recruitment campaign has perhaps been testament to our new energy being put into these equality standards. and objectives. So in our last recruitment process, and again thank you to Andy Bowers and team, because they've put a lot of work into making sure that the leadership throughout this organisation was consistent. 42 individuals have been offered employment. These are whole-time posts, and 31% of them are women. So that's significantly higher than we've ever achieved before. So, absolute accolades to everyone involved, and it really is all hands to the pump to make sure the commitment, the focus, and the inclusion of these people has been high on our priority. And I would absolutely want to repeat out loud here that that's meant no change in our standards. That's meant no change in the way we test people's capabilities of being firefighters. Because there was some suggestion on some parts of social media that this was somehow dropping standards to encourage more. Absolutely not the case. We know that we've not adjusted those standards one little bit. We've encouraged and we've approached and broken down the barriers these people would normally think it wasn't for them. And we've had also a 2.3% attraction rate from the Black, Asian, minority ethnic group as well, which is still low, but still much better than we've ever achieved before. So still more work to do there, but a real move forward for us as a service in terms of attracting those that we believe should be operating in our organisation, making us look and feel much more inclusive, so that in turn creates more momentum in our communities for others to apply. Now, I still feel very clearly that having a recruitment figure or quota or some other target like that will be incorrect. I think the focus on our approach here is to make sure that we have an open workforce that believe in inclusivity, that we attract the right people from our communities that need to be firefighters, but their gender, their race has nothing to do with whether they can be good firefighters. And that's something we're really determined to take out all those things which are, maybe not on the surface of the systems we use sometimes, that do end up having those people falling out of the system. An example would be the fitness tests, which tends to take out women more along the selection process than men, but actually making it happen later in the process immediately takes that challenge away. So you're still tested your fitness, but you get a chance to bring yourself to that level, realising that's the standard we expect. So that's a really important change as an example of what we've done. So the recommendation there that the annual government statement as set out in Appendix A is approved. Get the same one as we had before, because it's a 4-year statement, but it's just about refreshing our commitment to it, and allows me to continue to deliver against those aspects. We'll provide further detail update on our progress against those objectives in another authority, but just to seek your approval for that recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, thank you indeed for that, Chief Officer. We all recognise that we've got some way to go to get where we want to be, but clearly significant progress has been made, and it's very pleasing to hear about the recent recruitment. That well done to everybody for that. Members, any questions here? Jonathan, did you want to say something?
Yes, I'd like to congratulate the fire service for what they have done and what they are doing.
Yes.
Okay, it's very positive. And albeit we all agree that things have to improve. Just one idea. Councillor Mintoff mentioned the Prince's Trust. I think most of us have been or attended at least one or two of these wonderful events, probably in our own patches. And as you said earlier, Chairman, they are quite emotional events. I'm not suggesting there should be recruitment mechanisms, but I imagine you're talking about youngsters who are involved with the fire service, albeit not fully, but at least they're involved with people in the fire service for a period of at least a month, maybe longer. And these instructors may well get a feel for potential students who, at the beginning, are having issues, family issues, social issues, but who obviously show an incredible strength of character and ability to learn, may well be encouraged to come and join the service if they've got the potential. I'm not suggesting it's a recruitment exercise, and I'm just wondering, up to now, I don't suppose we've got records on how many of these youngsters have actually come into the service, but it seems to me an area that we could look at. And I have noticed that it goes across ethnicity, gender, the whole lot.
Thank you, Councillor. I think I know what Andy's going to say, but I'm going to hand to Andy at this point.
So absolutely, and as you rightly say, they get experience of the fire service, they get hopefully the benefit of the Prince's Trust. There was one really good example, in fact she featured in the recruitment campaign of a young lady who joined the Prince's Trust, troubled background, etc., as is often the case, became a retained firefighter for us after being a Prince's Trust volunteer the second time round, and is now a whole-time fire for us. So there are some really good examples.
That's great news. That's good news.
Can I sort of again thank for the officers for the report and Andy and to Neil. When one looks at BAME, is that Neil said a 1.2%, and I think the worrying part to me when I look at that chart on page 144 is that 50% of those 1.2%, the 20, is in Green Book. Only 0.6% are firefighters. And I think that is the challenge, because it goes back to what we've said in the past, is that certain people in that area don't see that they want to be a firefighter because they want to be in a sort of an office-type environment. And therefore, that really almost says that there. And I think our challenge is going to be getting the Grey Book retained and whole time increased in that area. And I think we're doing the right thing. All we can do is make sure the message is out there. The service is open to anybody who can fulfill the criteria. Doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. And providing we're doing that, and which we are, and we're doing very good campaigns, we can't, as the old saying goes, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can't make them attend. And we've also got to remember the number of people or percentage-wise in the county is a lot less than some of these other areas, when I suspect the 4.7 national figure will be, although it's a national figure, there's a lot of area where there's a lot of these people, and that actually helps to boost it.
I think, sorry, Mr. Chairman, just to respond to that, I think you raised some interesting points. The thing I want to assure myself of, and that's why the Insight team will be working more closely with members of that community, because we go to, and as many of you do, go to lots of events in our locality from some of those BME groups, and it's fantastic. We engage well, and we have a good reputation, good relationship. What we don't understand still is why members of that community aren't firefighters. It may be some unseen barrier we haven't detected. So I want to satisfy myself that there aren't barriers, and if there are, we take them out, as we are discovering with women joining the fire service that there were barriers which were unseen by many, and we're taking those out, and suddenly we've seen the change. So I'm just making sure that's the case first before we rest on our laurels slightly and say, well, maybe they just don't want to. At this stage, I'm not satisfied enough to be able to say that.
If I could just add a figure from the recent recruitment campaign, we mentioned the number of female successful applicants was 14 out of 42. 7 are BAME applicants, so that's a very high figure. Still a lot of work to do. It's absolutely not resting on our laurels, but it's a big improvement from where we've been before.
Switch on again. Can I take you to page 142, the recommendation there that the annual statement of equality workforce demographics be noted by Hampshire Fire and Rescue Authority? All agreed? Right, so now I take you to item 16, exclusion of the press and public. Can I welcome Sarah Bowers? This doesn't apply to you, Sarah. Please remain exactly where you are. But we switch off the sound system. No, not the sound system. The